Welcome to the Vine Podcast. And on today's episode, we're going to continue our discussions about Advent with a conversation that is going to be centered around the music of Advent, and then maybe some other thoughts and conversations that sort of spin off of that. And we briefly touched on some of this in our last podcast, but it was just kind of a fleeting couple of comments, and so we wanted to expand on that a little more today. And so Jason is joining me once again for this conversation. Hello, Jason.
Good morning, Warren. Great to be here as always.
That's right. And our special guest for today's episode is John Hatfield. Hello, John, and welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Warren. Hey, Jason.
Hi.
And so the connection with John is that John was the worship leader for the contemporary worship services at Clear Lake United Methodist Church when Jason and his family worshiped there before they moved to Belton. And so, John, you said that you are now, though, at Ecclesia Clear Lake. Is that right? Is that the church where you were at now?
That's right, yeah.
Okay, and you're the worship leader there as well?
I am, yeah.
Okay, cool. How has that experience been, and how are you enjoying worship leading there?
Yeah, it's good. We're a nice, tight-knit little community here on the southeast side of Houston, and the church has been around for about 13, 14 years now, I think. So sort of growing into our own, and it's we've been sort of navigating this season together and all of its challenges, but things are rocking along, so it's been good.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, all of our churches kind of have their own, in some ways, unique set of challenges that accompany this time, but we all are kind of facing the same issue for now, and so that kind of is a unifying factor amongst all of us, that everyone knows what we're dealing with in this, and we all may be handling it a little bit differently, but we're sort of all struggling through the same storm here. So,
yeah.
John, Jason had sent me a link to your Bandcamp page, which incidentally was the first time I'd ever heard of Bandcamp.
Oh, you're kidding me. That's a tragedy, Warren. That is an absolute tragedy.
I'm not very musically hip, I guess.
But now Warren's the biggest independent music supporter on the planet now that he's discovered Bandcamp, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, that makes it. I think it was Jimmy Kimmel or somebody that he went to like a music festival or something and was going around asking people what they thought of fake band names, and they were giving all these thoughts. Oh yeah, they're great. I knew them before they were big. Da, 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 da. It was great. But anyways, in your bio there, you describe yourself as the host of the Hymistry podcast, which is a great name for a podcast, a liturgy nerd, and a fan of great burgers everywhere. So let's start with the really important stuff. Where is your favorite place to get a burger?
Oh gosh, my favorite place to get just to get a burger.
Yeah, if you got to go get a burger today for lunch and you're taking somebody with you, where are you going?
Yeah, there's a place in Clear Lake down here called Miller's. Jason knows it. Miller's is a little hamburger dive that makes really great burgers, but. Probably for everyday burgers, I'm a Whataburger guy.
All right.
For the most part, and I say that with an asterisk because In-N-Out hasn't made its way to this side of Houston yet. It exists in other parts of town, but secretly, as long as I've lived in Texas, I'm a Texan now, so. I can't say this without violating a bunch of religious code, but I prefer In-N-Out Burger to Whataburger.
Heresy.
See, I've never even understood the debate between In-N-Out and Whataburger. It's Whataburger easily, and I mean all the other burgers like the dive burger places, yeah, all those kind of have a special. They're better in their own right. But if we're talking fast food stuff, I don't understand In-N-Out over Whataburger. I'm sorry.
It's been good
having you today, John. Yeah. We'll talk to you later. No.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Well, we won't spend any more time there.
Clearly, I failed the test.
You did. No, I'm just kidding. But so to get to a little more of our actual the meat of our conversation, so to
No,
speak. To
no
keep
pun
on the
intended.
burger theme.
Yeah.
No pun intended. You also described yourself there as a liturgy nerd. So I'm wondering, can you kind of explain that one to us? How does one become a liturgy nerd, and where did kind of your passion for liturgy come from?
I think liturgy nerd is a title that's bestowed upon someone by other people who are maybe tired of listening to them talk about liturgical things all the time. And so it's not maybe a moniker that I would take upon myself willingly, as much as it's been gifted to me, especially by people in my community who get to listen to me talk about the church calendar and rhythms of worship and the narrative of the Christ story throughout the year and things like that. So while I accept the title of liturgy nerd, I'm a big fan of liturgical aspects of worship. I'm a big fan of narrative driven storytelling worship, and I think the liturgical rhythms of the church, especially reflected in the church year, are a gift that have been handed down for centuries in the church, and it's a privilege to be able to continue those traditions, regardless of denominational background or you know type of setting. We all have access to those rhythms and traditions if we're willing to explore and tap into them.
Yeah, that's good. And so I know there's certainly a rhythm to the calendar and to the liturgical calendar and ways that impacts sort of seasons of worship. And so you use that phrase, the rhythm of worship. And I'm curious, as you think about the rhythm of worship, how much does that play into what you plan for, like on an individual Sunday? And does that impact what you do on an individual Sunday, or is it more kind of holistic around the environment you're kind of trying to create in worship in general?
I think it's probably a little bit of both, but it definitely impacts the individual Sundays throughout the year, depending on where we are in the calendar and kind of the question that people have grown accustomed to hearing me ask is, what time is it? And with the church year, what we're really doing is marking time with the life of Jesus. And we are, we find ourselves in various places in that story at different times. And so there are rhythms in and out of fasting or preparation and into celebration and back into fasting and preparation and then into celebration. And so on any given week, it matters, to me as far as, how we prepare for worship and selections of content for worship and things like that. But on the broader scale, I think one of the sort of the most inspiring things about the church year is sort of the sweeping narrative that happens, every year with Advent and Christmas and Epiphany and then Lent and Holy Week and Easter and getting to live those rhythms until they sort of become a part of how you tell time. And so it kind of works on both of those levels,
Yeah, that's great. And so as you're thinking about just kind of the specifics of this time, I like that question of what time is it. If I was to ask you that right now, I'm assuming you would kind of say a time of preparation and waiting. Is that how you would describe this time? Would that be your answer to this?
Absolutely, yeah. Advent is definitely a time of preparation and reflection and sort of that inward stillness in waiting for something, waiting for something to come to fruition here, right?
Yeah.
And so, different traditions do it different ways. In our church, we have a theme for each week of Advent. Our first week was hope. Our second week was peace. And this upcoming Sunday is joy.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll sing songs about joy. We'll talk about the joy that we're anticipating, and the joy that we get to taste even now, in that anticipation. And so, yeah, I think Advent sort of stands in contrast to, well, for us, Advent stands in contrast to the holiday shopping season, right? If the world around us is saying, like, now's the time to get your stuff, like, now's the time to partake in these sales and these celebrations and these Christmas parties and whatever else, like, Advent sort of stands in contrast to that and says, wait, something better is coming.
Yeah.
It doesn't begin with Black Friday, right? And so we sort of have this, built into the history of our faith. We have this season of preparation. We have this season to kind of slow down and listen and wait. And I think that's such an important thing to cultivate in our lives in general, right? And what Advent does is provides us intentional space to do that as we reflect on things like, delayed gratification or denial of self and things like that, as we see the rush around us, and we can sort of call ourselves and the people in our communities and even the world around us, to whatever extent, to sort of remember that there's something better that we're waiting for than just the culmination of the holiday shopping season. Yeah.
And so I'm curious, as someone who, as you say, you've had this label bestowed on you of liturgy nerd, you're sort of, you're obviously wrapped up in leading a group in worship on a weekly basis, and so you're thinking about that and have this affinity for Advent. And so I'm kind of curious about how all those three sort of work together. And as you think about the concepts of Advent, what do you think, how does music play a role in sort of helping us to focus on those things and bring those things about in our own lives and in our hearts and things like that, as we're trying to present this contrast to what the culture around us is doing? Is there a special role that music plays in sort of helping us to get there, do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the music specific, if we're talking about like Advent specific songs, or songs that would convey those themes of hope and peace and joy and love, or songs about waiting, songs about the sort of already but not yet aspects of our faith and that sort of thing. I think music in worship is a means of co-creating an environment more than it is just eliciting an emotional response. I mean, I think the emotional response is definitely a component of that, but let me think about how I want to phrase this. Because like I can feel that I'm headed off in a tangent.
It's all right. We chase some rabbits sometimes.
Yeah, that wouldn't be unusual for this podcast at all.
Good deal. Because
so far we've been super streamlined so far.
Excellent.
Well, good. Go stream a thought with it. Just
we may go far afield here. I think providing people a context, sort of an artistic basis for expression, when we're inviting them into a season of sort of countercultural or even counterintuitive at this point behaviors and observations and reflection. Music helps us sort of set the table for things like that. We use music to get us in the mood for all sorts of things, right? Like we use music to get us amped up to work out, or we use music to chill so we can study, or we whatever it is that we use music for. And Well, I don't want to get too much into like the utilitarian aspects of that, because I think music and art are bigger and broader than just utilitarian uses. I think in the context of Christian worship, music has sort of two roles, and one of them is to sort of set the table and create the environment for people to come together. And the other one is a formational sort of role, because the longer we sing something, the more we sort of start to believe it, right? The words and the melodies sort of start to take root in our heads and our hearts in a way that maybe other things don't. Because, like, Warren, when you preach, folks are listening and taking in the words that you're saying, but they're not saying those words with you,
right?
Necessarily. They're not internalizing it by repeating it. But when we sing, and we could sing the same things, right? We could sing the same concepts, we could sing the same ideas, but when we're all singing that together, it sort of becomes a part of our bodies in a way, right? And our self-expression and the expression of our faith together, individually and as a community. And so there's a sort of a corporate creational aspect to Advent music. If I'm telling somebody, slow down, wait, it's not time yet. Let's think about what it means. Like, what does peace look like in a world that's full of violence? What does hope look like in a world that's full of hopelessness and loneliness? Mm-hmm. What does joy look like in a world that's filled with anxiety and fear? If we're talking about those things and singing about those things, it reinforces it in a formational way. And then we're doing it every year, right? So we're getting back to this idea that these rhythms are sort of shaping the way that we live, even more than just it's Christmas time, it's Easter time, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective, because I do think, just as you were talking, I had the thought that it does seem like, in other areas of our lives, we recognize the formational role that art plays, some more than others, but most of us have probably been impacted in some way by a movie or a song or an art exhibit or something. There's probably something along those lines that has impacted us in some way or had an effect on us. And I do think that probably in some traditions have sort of done better and recognized the potential for art to do that in church spaces more than others. But the ways that can affect us and impact us and inform us in worship and in a church setting makes sense. And I think maybe more fully recognized around this season than others. I think this is the Advent season seems to be one that is open to, or maybe more, it's one that has more artistic expression around it, it seems like, in church settings.
Sure.
And so, yeah, that's good. And kind of along the lines of what you said about there's this formational aspect to it. I thought of, you have a song that you wrote on your site called "Hope Is Here." And about that song, you said you wrote it to remind yourself of the necessity and even the beauty of waiting. Mm. And so I thought of that as you were kind of sharing that thought of the foundational aspects of it, and how maybe worship and maybe the arts in worship can help us to see some of the beauty of waiting. And so I'm curious, as you think about that, what in your mind is beautiful about waiting? Where do you see beauty in waiting?
Throughout Scripture, and definitely in the example of people of faith throughout the centuries, I think there are multiple examples of trusting God to deliver, trusting God to provide or to come through, and it doesn't happen in the window of time that we would necessarily expect. Right. And I think about that especially around this time of year, because, our gospel narrative for the birth of Jesus begins with the idea of, in the fullness of time. and this idea of at just the right time. Well, there would be no way for us to expect that fullness. When is the fullness of time? When is the fullness of time for us to experience life in Christ, for example? When is the fullness of time for us to experience unhindered joy in our lives? When is the fullness of time for us to see our hope come to fruition? And so I think a major theme of the Christian life, I think a major aspect of sanctification. Can we say sanctification on this podcast? Is that?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, cool. All right. I think a major aspect of sanctification is learning to wait. Wait on the Lord. The Isaiah passage from this last week in Isaiah 40. Those that wait on the Lord will renew their strength. I think God more often calls us into waiting than into any other posture in our lives. And it's not I think this is something that some years ago was sort of hit home for me in an Advent devotional that I read by an Anglican priest in Nashville named Thomas Mackenzie, and he has a Advent devotional called The Harpooner, and he talks about the idea of waiting as a person who hunts whales in old seafaring days, right? And they would get this rickety little boat off the side of the ship, and they'd cast it out into the ocean, and there'd be a team of rowers, and then there would be the one lone person in the front of the boat whose role it was to throw the harpoon right at the whale, and they had no other activity in the boat. They weren't rowing, so they weren't in control of where the boat was going or how fast it was going to get there. They had one role, and that was to wait and watch. And so that waiting is an anticipatory waiting, right? That waiting is an expectant waiting. It's a Thomas Mackenzie says it's a coiled waiting, right? It's a there's a tension to that waiting. It's not apathy or antipathy or full relaxation. And I think that tension is what creates the beauty, right? We know that this world is not the way that it will be, that it can be, that it should be. But we know that Christ's coming, and in Advent we anticipate both the incarnation and Christ's return. We know that Christ's coming begins and will ultimately set the world right. And so that tension is what creates the beauty, and gives us something to hope for, something to wait for, something to look for off the bow of the ship as we go.
Yeah, I've never thought about tension being what brings the beauty, but I think, again, if you think about other sort of areas of life, how many of those things are built on the tension of, what if you take tension out of movies, there's a lot of movies where you're not going to be left with much, and sporting events, the almost the entire premise behind an attraction to sporting events is the tension of competition and winning and losing, and how is this going to end, and how much the tension is the compelling factor.
That's right.
In so many other things that we engage ourselves in, and seeing the beauty of that within this season is an interesting perspective. I think that's good. Yeah.
Well, and the part of waiting that I think is very underappreciated in general, not just as it relates to Advent, but just in general, is that waiting forces you to slow down, and slowing down is something that I don't know if it's necessarily always been the case in human history, but certainly in my life and in the life of a lot of us in American society, slowing down is something that almost feels like it has to be done intentionally. Pandemics notwithstanding, that we don't often slow down. And I've noticed that when I'm forced to slow down, when I'm forced to wait, I do a better job of kind of taking stock of what I have and what's around me. I'm better able to see and experience the little things in life that are easy to kind of overlook or take for granted. And so I can't help but wonder if part of the benefit of the season of Advent, kind of like what we've been talking about, is, we're anticipating Christmas Day, and kind of going back to what John was talking about, the sort of the consumerism that is developed around that, that a lot of our anticipation is around that, and our eagerness is around that. But Advent forces us to wait, not just for the consumeristic parts, but for kind of the anticipation of family and friends, and the celebrations that we have around Christmas, and the the music. Christmas music is so ubiquitous and so much an indelible part of the season, not just with Advent, of course, but with the entire season. And I think all of the anticipation and the waiting that that we allow ourselves to engage in kind of make for such a rich experience when it does arrive. And waiting in general is just something that is very underappreciated in our society nowadays, and it just helps me kind of become more aware of the beauty and the simplicity of the mundane, of the everyday, but also of the things that may not be mundane, but that may be taken for granted or overlooked. And with Advent specifically, it's easy to take for granted, especially if you're like me and have always grown up in the church and in a Christian family. You take for granted kind of the birth and life and death and resurrection of Jesus. And that's one of those things that, I've heard about since I was born, and it's easy for me to just forget about. Well, Advent's a time for me to remember that. And, Lent obviously being another time to remember that, in a very different way, and with different focuses. But for me, that's what and so I see the waiting part as being not just a necessary part, but a beneficial part, that it has its own value and its own benefit to Christians as well.
Yeah, I told, after our last podcast, Jason, I told our Zoom group on Wednesday that one of the thoughts that I'd had about waiting, because we talked about some of that you had mentioned, John, about that waiting is not, it's different from this just kind of sitting around doing nothing. It's not spiritual laziness. It's not apathy, that it's this anticipatory waiting. And so afterwards I thought of, I hate it when I'm in line at like a counter service restaurant, like Mod Pizza is the one that I frequent the most, or Subway, or any place where you order at the counter, and you have this long line and you're waiting, and then the person in front of you gets up to the counter and they don't know what they want, and they start looking at the menu like in that moment, like they've been playing on their phone or something or whatever the whole time in line. And it's like, what have you been doing this whole we've been waiting here for 10 minutes, and now you're just now looking at the menu for the first time? Like, what are you doing? You could have been preparing yourself for this moment. You knew that it was coming, and now you're not ready. And
amen.
So there's a preparatory aspect of it. So
that's exactly right.
All right, so I want to think specifically kind of now about some of the music of Advent, and I want to do something here, like, because I think for those of us who don't think about some of the stuff maybe as frequently as you do, or are engaged with the music of it, it seems like Advent and Christmas music really kind of get jumbled together. Do Do you see a distinct separation between Advent music and Christmas music as you think about it from a worship perspective, as a worship leader, or is there quite a lot? Because it seems like inherently there is going to be quite a lot of overlap there. So do you see those as two distinctive things, or is there kind of overlap, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there are definitely Advent songs that we sing even in specific weeks of Advent. As we sort of go through the Advent story and progress toward Christmas, one of the images that sort of shows up throughout time is that idea of like growing light as we move toward Christmas, right? And so the first week of Advent takes place in darkness. And so songs like O Come, Emmanuel, that are really pensive and sort of, have that tension to them, right? Now, even that song calls for joy, calls for rejoicing in the refrain, right? But there is sort of an inherent, sort of darker tone to some of that music. But there's also, as we move closer and closer to Christmas Day, as we move closer and closer to, sort of the full realization of the incarnation of Christ, those songs sort of start to be infused with more expectation of what's coming. And so I had a conversation the other day about whether or not "Joy to the World" is an Advent song.
We discussed that in our Wednesday night Zoom actually this week.
Did
as well,
you?
So.
Yeah. Did
Yeah.
you say yes? Yes, it is.
Well, we both perspectives were presented by different people in the Zoom. One that it was an Advent song, and one that it was a Christmas song. So
Sure. Well, so that song specifically, that hymn is it's both, right? It's definitely both. But there's a lot of like eschatological content to that song, like final things, more than Advent, first, celebration of the incarnation or anticipation of the incarnation. But that point us toward, for a long time in church history, Advent was, specifically almost exclusively looked at eschatologically. And so it was looking at, even I think maybe darker themes, to some extent than hope and love and joy and peace. Right. And so I think there are songs that stand kind of on their own in Advent, and then there are songs that get a little blurrier about Advent and Christmas. And then there may also be songs, depending on how Christmas is observed, that are more appropriate for Christmas than we may even think that they are, right? So there are hymns that we would not associate necessarily with Christmas. Like we'll sing Silent Night, and we'll sing "O Come All Ye Faithful," and we'll sing "Go Tell It on a Mountain," and things like that, right? But there are hymns like "Love Divine, All Loves Excelling, Joy of Heaven to Earth Come Down." That's a Christmas hymn. We sing that in lots of different times, in the year, but that's a Christmas hymn. And so I think there, sort of by contrast, there's probably also Advent songs that we may not necessarily, put in Advent, but that definitely fit the context. And so it's really about, again, evoking those themes and sort of positioning our minds to reflect on those themes of waiting and tension and anticipation and hope. And it's less about, at least for me, there probably was a time early on in latching on to, liturgy and church tradition and things like that, there was a purity about it. Like, we're only going to sing Advent songs during Advent. We're not going to sing Joy to the World, and I don't feel that way anymore. And one of the things that I think is interesting about this year, specifically, is people are already experiencing the innate feelings that we try to evoke during Advent, right? They're already experiencing a little bit of disconnection, separation. They're already experiencing tension, even conflict.
Right.
They're experiencing a lot of the things that we sing about Christ coming to repair in O Come, Emmanuel, right? O come, desire of nations, bind in one the hearts of all mankind, right? Bid thou our sad divisions cease. Those are the things that we're living some of those things right now. And so I told a friend back in Lent, going into Holy Week, as the pandemic was, just sort of beginning, she was asking about her church and what they could do for Lent that year. And I told her, like, we're already living these realities. Like, we don't need to try to evoke these things. And so I have found, at least this year, that putting up Christmas lights and singing familiar songs is a comfort to people, and providing that comfort even in the midst of that, because they're already feeling that tension. I don't need to teach in that tension through music necessarily, because they're living it.
It's the air around us that we're breathing all the time. So
that's right. Yeah. And so I think most traditions that really lean heavily into church rhythms and traditions and things like that, recognize, like, we don't celebrate Advent, right? We celebrate Christmas. Advent is an observance or something that we keep, like a vigil. We keep watch. We keep Advent. We celebrate Christmas. We keep or observe Lent. We celebrate Easter. And those that we do those things because they are good practice. They're good practice for real seasons in our lives when we may have to go without. We may have to be strained, or we may experience things that are contrary to our expectations as to how the world should work. If that's not this time in our lives, I don't know what is. And so that's the real gift of the church year, right? Is the preparation, like the real rubber meets the road preparation of learning how to live in anticipation. It's not always going to be this way, right? We know that the pandemic is not forever. We know that these times that we're living in and the conflicts that we may be experiencing in our lives, interpersonally or on a larger scale, like it's not forever. And there are even now ways that peace and hope and joy can break into those moments. And so there's a very real and not at all abstract application for all of this stuff, and we're living in it right now. And so I find that people are sort of comforted by the familiar aspects of Advent and Christmas music this year. Generally, I like to try to find, sort of new angles, repurposing or retuning hymns is one of my favorite sort of artistic endeavors. But this year I've kind of pushed that off to the side just to kind of live into the familiar sort of timelessness of some of that music, so that we're not, so that we kind of have a home, to return to. And it gives us an opportunity to listen to history and listen to the church throughout the ages tell us, like, this isn't all there is. It does, everything changes, and think about saints of old who observed these same weeks, centuries ago telling you, just wait just a little longer, just hold on. Other Christians throughout time who lived through pandemics and persecution and conflict and war and hunger and all those things, and they're telling us, as we celebrate Advent, just hold on, just wait a little longer.
I think that's kind of the cloud of witnesses idea,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
And I think that was another thing that sort of I was struck by in some of the songs on your Bandcamp page in your Hope Is Here Advent EP. So one of the songs I mentioned earlier, you had written. The other two songs that were on there were written in 1664 and 1825. So yeah. These are not modern contemporary Christmas worship songs. These are words that have been around for a long time and that have been sung by people in all kinds of different Advent seasons. And I do think there could be a particular comfort in that of man, people have been singing these words for centuries, in times where the tension was more real than other times, and in times, maybe as you said, there may be seasons of Advent where I have to intentionally evoke those tensions and those emotions because everything is going well in my life, and I just I'm riding high. It's just win after win after win. And so there may be seasons of like that when those words are sung, and then there may be seasons when, as you said, I don't need to do anything to evoke the tension because it's all that I know. And there is something I think about that cloud of witnesses idea that can be a source of comfort for us, just in life, but particularly in this season as we think about some of the Advent stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And so as kind of continuing to think about Advent and Christmas music, it does seem like, because I was thinking about this, and because it feels sort of like, we have more music that's specifically written for these seasons, maybe than other seasons. And so I was thinking about Easter, like we have songs that speak to the Easter concepts of resurrection and things like that, but we sing them throughout the year. We don't necessarily think of them as Easter songs. Whereas with Christmas and Advent, there are songs that, like, if you sang "O Come Emmanuel" in July, people might think, you've kind of, John, do you remember what time it is? Like, this isn't the time for joy to the world, or O come Emmanuel.
Right.
And so that was one of the things that Jason and I were kind of curious about. Like, do you find as someone who is artistically driven, as someone who is a songwriter, do you find there's something sort of more inspiring about this particular season, or do you think we find some influences? We have so many Christmas songs culturally and secularly. Is there some of that influence that bleeds over into church life, or what do you kind of see as far as the artistic expression goes around this season?
Yeah, I think I definitely feel maybe even, I don't want to say more inspired, but I do feel particularly inspired around Advent and Christmas. If you go to my Bandcamp page right now, there's 2 Advent and Christmas EPs and a single hymn of doxology. That's all that's up there right now, because that's by and large the majority of the recording that I've done in the last several years. And so I do find the Advent's I guess if we have a favorite, Advent's probably my favorite season on the calendar, because of what it evokes and what it represents and what it's really pointing us toward in the incarnation and that sort of thing, and everything that means to us. I do think that there's probably some cultural influence folded into that, because there is such a massive collection of Christmas music, and the Christmas season seems to be a time of not just more music, but more singing. Like we find it more culturally acceptable to sing together in public during Christmas time, and I don't know if people still go Christmas caroling. Certainly probably not this year, but for a long time that's been a much more there's nobody's going out and singing songs like you say in Lent, we're not.
There's no Lent carolers. Yeah.
There's no Lent carolers. Yeah. And I think that's saying something.
Maybe that's something you could start.
I think I would be alone in my observation of that exercise if I showed up to a nursing home to sing "O Sacred Head Now Wounded." That might not go over super well, but if I show up to a nursing home in Advent or Christmas and sing Christmas songs, everybody sings along and we have a good time, and it just seems to be a much more sort of socially acceptable thing around Christmas time to sing together, and so I think that contributes some to the volume of music that we find at Christmas time, and I don't know. I mean, a lot of artists that I follow and appreciate even back in time, it's always a special thing when they put out a Christmas record or whatever, and so how are they going to do your favorite Christmas songs and that sort of thing? It's kind of just a part of our artistic culture. And so I think that is some of it. There is, to me, especially because of the things that we focus on, the themes and the ideas of joy, and we can definitely get that sort of dopamine hit from Christmas music, right? Like, I know folks that start listening to Christmas music in October or whatever, and I've got a couple of friends. My hymnistry co-host, Luke, listens to Christmas music all year round. He loves Christmas music, and I love Christmas music too, but I don't think anybody loves Christmas music as much as Luke Bronner does. But it is one of those things that there's a nostalgia, there's a sentimentality, there's a deep feeling that comes from a lot of that music, and so we gravitate toward it, and we try to our brains try to get it as often as possible, and we get that out of Christmas music, I think, more than anything else. We may not necessarily get that out of Advent music per se, depending on how we're wired or the type of tradition that we grew up in. I think I probably do a little bit, in the sense that singing "O Come, Emmanuel" or "Come Thou Long Expected Jesus," or some of the hymns that are on "Hope Is Here," "Come Thou Precious Ransom." That song for me is I love that hymn so much, and it sort of lyrically goes through the whole church year, in its expression. "Come Thou Precious Ransom." It talks about our hosannas and our palms, so we're in Holy Week there, and it sort of takes us through the whole year in a single hymn. But those songs for me are deep and meaningful this time of year, and prepare my heart for a Christmas celebration that to scale, right? Because for me, if we're going to spend a month, essentially, right, waiting and anticipating and saying, not yet, then Christmas should be a giant party. And I think one of the big gifts of the church year is that Christmas is a 12-day festival. And if we're only celebrating Christmas on December 25th, we're missing out on really the majesty of what that means, and sort of the celebration of the incarnation on a grand level. Even as we, some of us might experience fatigue at the end of the holiday shopping season. Start taking down the tree on December 27th and whatever else. But I think if the message of Advent is wait and hold on, because the light is coming, the message of Christmas is don't stop celebrating. Never stop celebrating the incarnation. And just like you said with Easter, there are Easter hymns and resurrection songs that we sing every Sunday because as Christians, we celebrate the resurrection every Sunday. And that's always going to be the message of the Easter, the resurrection story, is that what that does for us is unending. And the same thing is true of the incarnation. Never stop celebrating the incarnation. That's the message of Christmas. And so you get that contrast right out of the box.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I want to get you out of here in just a minute with kind of a lightning round of questions. And so we'll do that in just a second. But before we do that, if you mentioned your hymnistry podcast again. So could you kind of if people want to hear more from you, give us a brief description of that podcast and what y'all try to do there.
Yeah. So hymnistry, we haven't done a new season of hymnistry in a while, but the cool thing about that podcast, I think,
it would be new if you haven't listened to it. So
it's new if you haven't listened to it, and a lot of the stuff that we get into is maybe new songs that you're not familiar with, or concepts along. We tried to arrange the whole show along the church calendar so that we're talking about songs during appropriate times and what those seasons are, similar to the conversation that we've had today. We talk about hymns in specific seasons. We talk about the seasons themselves and how we celebrate or observe different times of the church year. We talk with artists and musicians that have retuned. The idea of the show is specifically sort of built around retuned hymns, old or obscure hymns that maybe people aren't completely familiar with, but there's a lot of artists out there that are putting new music to really great old texts that are maybe a little bit less well known.
Well, I'll just, about hymnistry, I've listened to all the episodes, and I will just kind of repeat what John said about there's some really good original music. They have some guest performers on, and some of the original music. Well, a lot of the original music is just really incredible stuff. And so, they do have a lot of discussion and conversation, but I think one cool thing is that there's always, new songs and cool music to listen to as part of that too.
Yeah, we got to talk to some, sort of heroes of ours. We had a day where we got to hang out with Robbie C. and Latifa Alatas from Page 116, and just some really cool people who have been doing that kind of work for a long time. And it was really, really cool to get to sit and listen to them share stories about the hymns and the way that those hymns have impacted them, and also just get to hear them, get to be in the room when I tell you, sitting and listening to Robbie play and sing, just in the room with a microphone is an experience. That guy can just turn it on, and so good. So thanks for listening to that show, Jason. It's near and dear to me, and I'm really proud of it and happy to have it out there. So thanks.
Well, John, we appreciate you taking time to spend with us today. And as Jason and I have talked about before, we're still sort of newbies and amateurs to some of the church calendar stuff. We didn't grow up in traditions that typically followed a lot of the calendar things. And so we find ourselves growing more and more of an affinity for these types of seasons and the calendar. And our church kind of jumps in and out of some of the calendar stuff. We don't really follow it fully. But we have typically observed Advent, but it's always good to get to hear the perspective from someone who spends a lot more time thinking about these things and pondering these things. And so I've enjoyed the conversation and appreciate you jumping on with us today.
Yeah, me too, Warren. It's always fun to sit and chat about I could talk about this stuff all the time, to glazed over faces sometimes, and I appreciate the opportunity to chat and to hang out, and it's been good conversation.
Yeah. All right. So we're gonna get out of here today with a lightning round.
All right.
And So I'm just going to fire some stuff off and tell me your first reaction, first answer. So here we go. John, what is your favorite Advent song?
Come Thou Long Expected Jesus.
What about favorite non-Advent worship song?
Ooh, we'll come back to that one.
All right. Most overrated burger topping?
Relish.
Amen.
The most important element of a great burger is what?
The blend of the meat that's used.
That's good.
Gotta have some pork belly in it. That's the key.
Favorite Christmas movie?
Oh, I'm gonna get in trouble for this.
We can cut it out if we need to.
It's Christmas Vacation.
Oh, that's mine too. You don't get in trouble for that.
Okay, all right, good.
See, I thought you were
All
going
right,
to say
good.
Die Hard.
It's not my favorite Christmas movie, but I do consider it a Christmas movie.
Yeah.
Mine is either Christmas Vacation
it's-
or Elf, so,
Yeah, me too. Yeah, those are my top two. Yeah.
All right, good, all right. Well, you're forgiven for the In-N-Out mistake then.
There we go. See, there's always redemption.
Okay, so the Christmas Carol Away in a Manger, is it overrated, underrated, or properly rated?
Underrated.
Hot takes. All
I think
right.
it's overrated. All right, favorite Christmas food or snack?
Sausage balls.
That works. And then, what was the one we skipped? Favorite non-Advent worship song to lead in worship?
Yeah, it's a song called "Dress Us Up" by John Mark McMillan.
Very good. I'm not familiar with that one.
The line in the chorus is, "The love of God is stronger than the power of death."
Good. Well, that's a good note for us to end on. So the love of God is stronger than the power of death. So we'll end there. Thanks for joining us, John. It's been good. We've enjoyed it, and grateful for the work that you and that others like our worship minister here, Chris, are doing to try to bring people together in worship in a time when everyone is not together is a difficult task, and in many ways is probably a thankless task. And so thank you for the work that you're doing, and that all the other worship leaders like you are doing to try to keep us connected through worship in this strange time.
Yeah, thanks, Warren. I appreciate it. This has been fun. I'd love to come back on anytime you want to have me.
Sounds good. We'll take you up on that. So, all right. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
If you'd like more information about the Hymistry podcast discussed in this episode, you can search the Apple or Android podcast store for Hymistry. That's HYMNISTRY. I've listened to every episode and highly recommend it for anyone interested in contemporary worship music, especially that has strong roots in traditional hymns. And to close out this episode, here's an original song for Advent that John published on his Bandcamp page a few years ago. Hope is Here. Go to johnhatfield.bandcamp.com. So please enjoy Hope is Here.
How long can you hold on? How long can you wait? How long can you look for sunrise? How long is too late? It feels like forever. You gotta have faith. We're going to see the sunrise in one day, but we have hope, like a prayer to get through the night. Love, like a song instead of a fight. darkness out there in the night. The morning is breaking through clouds with its light. So we'll have hope like a prayer to get through the night. Love like a song instead of a fight. Joy like the brightest of heavenly lights. Peace like a river. Oh, hope is here and love cast out all fear and joy. We'll hold you near and give you peace, and hope is here and love cast out all fear and joy. We'll hold you near and give you peace and hope. Hope like a prayer to get through the night. Love like a song instead of a fight. Joy like the brightest of heavenly lights. Hope like a prayer to get through the night. Love like a song instead of a fight. Joy like the brightest of heavenly lights. Peace like a river. Oh, peace like a river. Peace like a river. Hope is here and love cast out all fear